You know that feeling when your smartphone constantly prompts you to install a software update?
Oh, yeah. The one you ignore for like a week.
Exactly, but you finally tap install,
Yep.
right, and the screen just goes completely black.
Yeah.
And for a few minutes, the phone is totally unresponsive. You might even panic for a second, wondering if you just like bricked your device.
Yeah, sure.
But then it lights back up, and the entire operating system is different. I mean, the interface is cleaner, the background processes run faster, the battery lasts longer.
Right, right.
It's the exact same physical piece of hardware, but it's operating in a completely new reality.
Because the underlying architecture of how that device processes information has been, well, fundamentally rewritten.
Yeah.
It isn't just running a new app,
Yeah.
It has a totally new way of existing.
And yet, when it comes to upgrading our own lives, we almost never do that.
No, we really don't.
Instead, we try to download a bunch of shiny new apps, which, in this analogy, are basically our New Year's resolutions, like wake up at 5 a.m. or eat more vegetables.
Right, the classics.
And we try to force them to run on this totally outdated, buggy operating system, and then we wonder why the app crashes after 2 weeks.
Exactly.
So if you're sitting there thinking that your attempts at building new habits usually feel, well, useless, you're not alone. And the source material we're looking at today argues that this failure is actually the only logical outcome. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one because the author makes this incredibly compelling case that the vast majority of people fail at changing their lives because, well, they're constantly treating the symptoms rather than the actual disease.
Right.
We view our daily actions as the problem. So we try to change the actions, but our actions are really just a byproduct of our identity.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We're unpacking a pretty intense document today. It's called The Cybernetic Protocol for Total Identity Transformation.
It's quite a title.
It really is. And it blends like behavioral psychology, the stages of human ego development, and the science of cybernetics, all to offer this literal blueprint for rewriting your psychological operating system.
And the big promise here is that you can initiate this reboot in exactly one day.
Yeah. So by the end of this conversation, you're going to have the literal minute-by-minute mechanics of that protocol to help you break out of autopilot.
I think this approach is so fascinating because it validates that really common, really frustrating experience of failure we all have.
Totally. We just beat ourselves up, right? When we abandon a goal, we label ourselves as lazy or undisciplined.
Right. But the source material suggests you are always going to fail. Because trying to force new habits on an old identity is, well, it's like trying to run ultra-demanding next-generation video editing software on a hard drive from Tiny 12.
Yeah, it's just going to crash.
Exactly. The foundational architecture simply cannot support the demands of those new actions.
So let's look at the first major concept the author uses here. They argue that you aren't where you want to be because you aren't the person who would be there.
Right.
People focus on what the author calls the second-order requirement, which is changing your actions. But they completely ignore the first-order requirement.
Which is changing who you are.
Right. Because the friction of trying to maintain actions that actively conflict with your core identity, it's just too high for the human brain to sustain.
It really is.
The source gives some great examples of highly successful people to illustrate this. Like, think about a bodybuilder with an incredible physique or a CEO running a massive company.
Okay.
From the outside, we look at them and we think, wow, they must possess this superhuman level of daily discipline. But I mean, I have to push back on the author's premise here for a second.
Sure, good.
Surely the first time that bodybuilder picked up a weight or the first time that entrepreneur had to cold call a client, it was a massive grind, right? It can't just be effortless from day one.
Well, no, you're right. And the source actually addresses that nuance. What's crucial to understand here is the transition phase versus the established identity.
Okay, how so?
So while the initial shift obviously requires conscious effort, the ultimate goal is to reach a point where the behavior becomes the path of least resistance.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. To the outside world, watching a bodybuilder weigh out their plain chicken and rice looks like a miserable, painful grind.
It sounds miserable.
Right. But to the bodybuilder, that lifestyle is entirely natural. It aligns perfectly with who they believe they are. If you ask that bodybuilder to sit on the couch and, eat junk food all day, that would actually feel like a grind to them.
Oh, wow.
They have to force themselves to do it because it completely violates their identity.
And it's the exact same for the CEO. Like, They might actively hate lying in bed past their alarm clock because their identity is just so tied to being productive and responsive. So the crucial rule the author lays out is that if you want a specific outcome, you have to adopt the lifestyle that creates that outcome long before you reach the actual goal.
Because if you don't, you fall into this trap of temporary modification. You tell yourself you're just going to suffer through a diet to lose 30 pounds, and then you can go back to, quote unquote, enjoying your life.
Right, because you haven't actually changed the operating system. You just ran a temporary script.
Yep.
You lose the weight, you go back to your old identity's habits, and you immediately regain it all.
And that's why, if simply trying to muscle through new actions isn't the root solution, we have to look deeper.
Right, we have to look at why we take those actions in the first place, which brings us to the uncomfortable truth about our hidden motives.
Yeah. This is where the source leans heavily on the psychology of Alfred Adler.
Adler, right.
Yeah. Adler introduced this concept of teleology, which is basically the idea that all human behavior is goal-oriented.
Goal-oriented, okay.
Right. Adler argued that even our most self-destructive, seemingly irrational behaviors are secretly trying to achieve a goal. We just aren't consciously aware of what that goal actually is.
So our conscious mind thinks we're failing, but our unconscious mind is like executing a highly successful strategy.
Exactly.
I love the examples the author uses here because they completely reframe how we view laziness. Like scratching an itch on your nose is a conscious goal. You feel an itch, you want it to go away, you scratch it. Simple.
Right.
But what about sitting on the couch in the middle of the day, mindlessly scrolling on your phone?
Oh, yeah.
The author argues that that is an unconscious goal to deliberately burn time before a responsibility you just don't want to face.
It's so revealing when you view procrastination through this teleological lens. We usually label procrastination as a lack of discipline, right? We tell ourselves, oh, I'm just disorganized or I'm lazy.
Yeah, constantly.
But from Adler's perspective, procrastinating is an active, highly effective, unconscious goal to protect yourself from judgment. If you never finish the project, no one can tell you it's bad.
If I can interject with a little self-deprecation here.
Please do.
If an alarm had gone off at like 1:30 p.m. yesterday and forced me to analyze my behavior, it would have caught me watching a 40-minute video on how to restore a rusty cast iron skillet.
Oh, nice. Do you cook with cast iron?
I don't even own a cast iron skillet.
Oh, wow.
But I was actively avoiding an email from my accountant. And by watching that video, I successfully achieved the goal of not feeling the anxiety of that email.
Exactly. Your behavior successfully achieved the goal of psychological safety. And the same logic applies to, say, staying in a dead-end job.
Right.
The source notes that this isn't necessarily a lack of courage. It's often the active pursuit of safety and predictability.
Yeah.
It's a defense mechanism to avoid looking like a failure to people who view simply having a steady job as a sign of success.
So how do these defense mechanisms get built in the first place? Like, how do we end up with an identity that actively sabotages what we consciously say we want?
Well, to explain that, the source traces the anatomy of identity formation all the way back to childhood. It's an 8-step process.
Okay, walk us through it.
Imagine a toddler. Their fundamental primary goal is basic physical and emotional survival.
Right, obviously.
So they begin to perceive reality entirely through the lens of that survival goal. They start taking actions, maybe crying, maybe being quiet, acting out, and they are immediately conditioned by their parents and their culture.
Ah, so if they conform to what the parents want, they get rewarded with safety and affection.
Right.
And if they don't, they get punished.
Exactly. And through repetition, those conditioned behaviors become automatic. The child grows up and begins to internalize those behaviors as their core identity.
Like, I am the type of person who stays quiet to keep the peace.
Or, I am the type of person who has to overachieve to be loved.
Right.
But here's where the architecture becomes really rigid. Once that identity is formed, the brain's primary job is to defend it, to maintain psychological consistency.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that defended identity then shapes all future goals, and the cycle completely locks in.
The defense mechanism part of this process feels like the most relevant to why we actually get stuck. Because the author points out that we feel an attack on our identity the exact same way our physical body feels physical danger.
Yeah, it's intense. The brain does not easily distinguish between a threat to your physical survival and a threat to your psychological survival.
So when someone attacks your deeply held political ideology or your religious beliefs or even just your perception of yourself as like a hard worker,
It triggers a literal biological fight or flight response. Your amygdala fires up, Cortisol floods your system, and you react as if a tiger just jumped out of the bushes.
The source says it literally feels like being slapped in the face.
It really does.
Which explains so much about internet comment sections, frankly.
Well, 100%.
We aren't rationally analyzing new information. We're doubling down on our existing beliefs to protect our psychological survival, even if those beliefs are making us miserable.
Right. So if our brains are hardwired to defend our current identities with the intensity of a physical threat, how do we actually bypass that security system?
Right. How do we hack it?
Well, the source suggests we have to look at the developmental stages of the human ego to understand how the mind can evolve past these rigid defenses.
Yeah, the author utilizes a few psychological models to outline these 9 stages of ego development, ranging from the impulsive stage of a toddler all the way up to a unitive stage where the separation between self and the outside world completely dissolves.
Right.
But they note that most listeners of this kind of material are likely hovering somewhere between stage 4, which they call self-aware, and stage 8, which is construct-aware.
Let's clarify what construct-aware actually means because it's so central to the protocol.
Yeah, please do.
When you reach stage 8, you stop seeing your personality, your beliefs, and cultural norms as absolute truths. You begin to see them as constructs.
Well, just ideas we made up.
Exactly. They're useful fictions that you can pick up or discard depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
You realize that who you are is basically just a tool.
And regardless of what stage you are currently in, the source argues that the mechanism to move forward is true intelligence.
Right.
But they define intelligence in a very specific, almost aggressive way. They quote the entrepreneur Naval Ravikant, who says, "The only real test of intelligence is if you get what you want out of life."
It's a purely pragmatic definition. The success formula the author provides is that success equals agency plus opportunity plus intelligence.
Okay.
And in this context, intelligence is not your IQ score or your ability to memorize facts. It's not about how well you did on standardized tests.
Right.
Intelligence is defined through the concept of cybernetics.
I love that word. Cybernetics, it comes from a Greek term meaning to steer, right? It's literally the art of getting what you want by acting, sensing where you are, comparing your current position to your goal, and correcting your course.
It's a continuous feedback loop. The source uses the example of a ship crossing the ocean.
Okay.
The ship gets blown off course by wind and currents constantly, right? But the captain is continually taking measurements and adjusting the rudder to eventually reach the destination.
Oh, I see.
Or think of a thermostat. It senses a drop in temperature and turns on the heat. Or your pancreas releasing insulin when your blood sugar spikes.
So intelligence here isn't about being a genius. It's simply the refusal to get stuck.
Exactly.
But I want to explore how this completely reframes our view of failure. Like, if intelligence is just the cybernetic ability to course correct, then what does low intelligence look like in this model?
Well, in this framework, low intelligence systems or people hit a roadblock and just stop.
Okay.
The author uses the example of a writer who tries to build an audience. They publish a few essays, get zero traction, and then they just stop writing.
Because they lack the ability to experiment and adjust.
Right. They view the failure as an indictment of their identity rather than just raw data. They get stuck on the problem.
They don't adjust the rudder like the ship. They just drop anchor and complain about the wind.
That's a great way to put it. High intelligence is the deep internalized realization that absolutely any problem can be solved on a large enough timescale if you just keep iterating.
Yeah.
It means actively rejecting the culturally programmed path. You know, going to school, getting a safe job, getting easily offended when things go wrong, playing the victim, waiting to retire.
Right.
High intelligence requires diving into the unknown, gathering data from your failures, and steering.
So if high intelligence is the ability to steer your life, we need a steering wheel. We need a practical mechanism to actually alter the code of our operating system.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the core of the source material, the one-day protocol.
This is where it gets really actionable. The author outlines 3 distinct phases of rapid identity change: dissonance, uncertainty, and discovery. You have to become sufficiently disturbed by your current life to create dissonance. Then, you have to navigate the messy uncertainty of letting go of your old identity. And finally, you discover what you actually want.
And to force this process, they've designed a protocol meant to take exactly 1 full day of your focus.
Yep, 1 full day.
Let's walk through the architecture of this day. It starts in the morning with what the author calls psychological excavation. You need a pen, paper, and about 15 to 30 minutes.
And there is a strict rule here. You are not allowed to use AI to generate answers for you. You have to sit with your own thoughts.
You actually have to think.
I know, crazy, right?
Hmm.
But the goal of this morning session is to dig into your psyche and uncover your anti-vision.
Anti-vision?
Yeah. We're so accustomed to being told to visualize our dream life, but the author flips this completely on its head.
The questions from the source for this morning excavation are, frankly, deeply uncomfortable.
They're brutal.
Like, what is the dull and persistent dissatisfaction you've learned to live with? Right. Or my personal favorite. If absolutely nothing changes, describe an average Tuesday in 5 or 10 years.
Wow.
What have you missed? Who gave up on you? What do people say about you when you're not in the room?
The psychology behind starting with the anti-vision is rooted in how our biology processes motivation.
Okay, how so?
Moving away from pain is a much stronger, more immediate biological driver than moving toward pleasure. By vividly detailing the visceral disgust of the life you absolutely do not want, you create an immense amount of negative energy.
Right.
You're manufacturing the dissonance required to break your current inertia.
You're using the horror of that average Tuesday as rocket fuel to push you in a positive direction.
Exactly.
But as the author points out, a morning journaling session isn't enough to rewrite your operating system. You might feel motivated at AM, but by noon, your old habits will drag you right back down.
Yeah, the motivation fades.
Which is why the protocol moves into the second phase, interrupting your autopilot throughout the day.
This is where we get into the practical application of pattern interrupts. You spend most of your day in this hypnotic, culturally conditioned trance managed by a part of your brain called the basal ganglia.
Okay.
It runs your routines so you don't have to expend energy thinking about them.
Yeah.
But you cannot change if you're sleepwalking through these routines.
So to combat this, the protocol requires you to set random blaring alarms on your phone throughout the day.
Yes.
And when the alarm goes off, you have to stop whatever you're doing and answer a specific prompt. Like at 11 a.m., the alarm asks, what am I avoiding right now by doing what I'm doing?
And the sudden noise of the alarm forces a localized spike in adrenaline. It literally jolts you out of the basal ganglia's autopilot and forces your prefrontal cortex, the conscious analytical part of your brain, to boot up and take control.
That is so cool. And then at 1:30 p.m., the alarm asks, if someone filmed the last 2 hours, what would they conclude I want for my life?
That one hits hard.
It really does. And at 7:30 p.m., what did I do today out of identity protection rather than genuine desire? You're basically gathering raw, unfiltered data on your real teleological motives all day long.
Exactly. By the end of the day, you've completely shattered the illusion that you're in control of your actions. You've forced yourself to look at how often your behavior is driven by the desire for psychological safety rather than your stated goals.
Right.
But raw data isn't enough. You have to synthesize it that evening so the new operating system actually compiles and saves.
So the evening synthesis is about taking everything you've learned and creating a concrete direction. First, you have to name the actual enemy.
And the source is very clear that the enemy is never your circumstances. It's not your boss. It's not the economy.
Right.
The enemy is the internal pattern or belief that has been running the show.
And once you name that internal enemy, you create your vision MVP, your minimum viable product for the future.
Yeah, like in software development. An MVP is the most basic, functional version of a product you can release to test if it actually works.
Right.
Applied to human identity, it means you aren't trying to map out a perfect, flawless version of yourself right away. You're just designing a basic prototype of an identity that doesn't actively sabotage you, something you could test and iterate on.
And to build this prototype, the source introduces the concept of turning your life into a literal video game.
This is my favorite part.
It's brilliant. They draw on the work of psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who pioneered the concept of flow states.
Right.
He found that human attention reaches its peak state of optimal experience, which is flow, when we are engaged in realistic goals that perfectly match our current skill levels.
And video games are the ultimate flow state engines.
Oh, absolutely.
They command total obsession and focus because they provide clear rules, immediate feedback, and escalating challenges. By structuring your new identity using the architecture of a game, you give your mind the exact parameters it needs to thrive and stay engaged.
Let's explore how the author translates life into game mechanics. There are 6 components you have to build on the evening of your one-day protocol. You start by establishing the stakes. Your anti-vision becomes the lose condition.
Right. It's the terrible consequence of what happens if it's game over.
Conversely, your vision becomes the win condition. It is the overarching reason you are playing the game in the first place.
But a win condition that's like decades away won't keep you motivated today, which is why you need a main campaign.
That is your one-year goal. It's the specific storyline you were trying to complete right now. But even a year is too abstract for daily flow, so you break it down further into a one-month project.
Yeah. Think of the one-month project as the boss fight.
I love that.
If your one-year goal is to build a successful freelance business, your one-month boss fight might be acquiring the specific skill of cold pitching or building a portfolio website. It's the immediate hurdle you have to clear and the new loot or abilities you need to acquire to get to the next level.
Then you get down to the micro level. Your daily levers. These are your daily quests.
Right.
If you are playing an RPG, you have to grind a little bit every day to gain experience points. Your daily levers are the specific needle-moving tasks you must complete every single day to gain that XP.
And the final component is perhaps the most important for maintaining a flow state. Constraints. Constraints are the game mechanics in physics. They are the hard limitations you set that actually force you to be creative rather than lazy. A game with no rules is boring, right?
Totally.
By saying, I only have exactly 2 hours to work on this boss fight today, you force your brain to innovate and focus rather than endlessly procrastinating.
I mean, I understand the appeal of turning life into a game, but isn't that just tricking ourselves? Like, how does a fake game override decades of psychological conditioning?
Well, because goals are not about crossing a literal finish line. They're lenses of perception.
Yeah.
When you structure your reality with these 6 components, you're giving your prefrontal cortex a highly structured filtering system.
Oh, I see.
You basically create a psychological force field around your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It naturally filters out distractions, anxieties, and the pull of the old identity because you become entirely obsessed with the rules and progression of your own game.
Wow.
You're hacking the teleological nature of your brain by giving it a highly rewarding, conscious goal to pursue.
So let's bring all of this together for the listener. We've gone from the realization that New Year's resolutions fail because they try to force new apps onto an old operating system.
Yep.
We explored Adler's concept of teleology to understand that our lazy or self-destructive behaviors are actually highly effective, unconscious goals keeping us safe.
Right.
We learned that true intelligence is just the cybernetic ability to gather data, adjust the rudder, and steer. We examined the one-day protocol using the morning antivision for negative motivation and daytime alarms to jolt us out of our basal ganglius trance.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, we explored how to synthesize that data by gamifying our existence, turning progress into a flow state.
It is a really comprehensive blueprint for tearing down the old architecture and installing a system that actually supports the life you want to lead.
So here is my challenge to you. Look at your calendar. Block out tomorrow or your very next day off and actually run this protocol.
Yeah, dude.
Take 15 minutes in the morning to write out that horrifying average Tuesday antivision. Set those random, aggressive alarm interrupts on your phone. See what secrets your autopilot is trying to hide from you when you force yourself to answer those prompts.
And as you embark on this reboot, I want to leave you with one final thought, circling back to the 9 stages of ego development we touched on earlier.
Okay.
We discussed how stage 8 is being construct-aware. The profound realization that all frameworks, all ideologies, and even your own deeply held identity are just useful fictions.
Useful fictions.
Right, tools to be used rather than absolute truths to be defended.
Yeah.
So if all identities are just useful fictions, then this entire one-day protocol and the beautifully structured video game you're about to build for yourself is just another fiction. It's a tool. So the question for you to mull over is this. What happens a few years from now when you finally master and outgrow this game? When this new identity has served its purpose and begins to hold you back from the next level of your evolution, will you have the courage to recognize it as a fiction, tear it down, and build an entirely new game all over again?
That is heavy, but incredibly liberating. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning your autopilot, and we'll see you next time. And remember, when it's time to update your operating system, don't just download a new app. Let the screen go black and rewrite the code.